I'm going to tie an H&L Variant, and I'm starting off with a size 12 dry fly hook and the vise. And the thread that I'll use to start is an 8/0 white. I'll take some wraps in the front, enough to get it locked in, and then I'll remove that tag. And I'll leave my thread at about the 2/3, 3/4 mark or so in the hook shank. I can tie in my upright wing at this point, and I'm going to use a white calf body hair. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can tie in 2 separate clumps for the 2 wings, or the way that I'll do it is tie it in as 1 clump and then separate the 2 once they're tied onto the hook. So I've removed some calf hair. I've cleaned up the bottom a bit of any really short fibers, and I'll put it in my stacker and align the tips. And I want this to be a hook shank in length, so when I take out my clump, I want to measure it out to be a hook shank. And I'll set it against, take my measurement, and then tie this on. And I'll take my wraps, and these are pretty much one on top of the other. I'll advance or go to the back of the hook slightly. You don't want to come up too close to the tips, because then it'll shorten your wing. I'm going to hold the butt sections up and take a cut that is parallel to the hook shank, and that'll give me a nice tapered cut and will help form that body as we get further along. At this point, I'll start to make this wing upright, so I'll hold it up and I'll create a thread dam underneath the material, and that will help it to stand up. So now at this point, I want to separate this into 2, so you can see the clump here. I'll take my thread and just trying to find the center point of these 2, and when I've separated them, I'll come back through with one more and another, and now they're in two pretty distinct groups. So I'll hold it on its side, so move your vise. Now I'm going to wrap it like you would create a parachute post, and I'll do the same thing for the other side. So tilting it, taking some wraps. Don't worry if they're not facing exactly the way you want them now, because the next step then is taking a figure 8 wrap and do as many as it takes to get them into the wing position that you want, so you can use that thread to help torque. So that looks pretty good to me. Tie this back. If you've trapped some of these fibers, which is easy to do, take a moment just to come back and clean those up. So now I'll tie in the tail, and I'll repeat the process here. So another clump of calf body hair. I'll remove it from the hide, knock off any of the short pieces and put it back in my stacker. Take some taps, and then this will be again about a hook shank in length. So I'll measure it out and tie it in, and then I'll wrap this back to where that taper started. Then I can come back through and trim this as close as possible to the threads without cutting them. And if I've done it properly, I should have a relatively uniform body to tie in. I'll come back, and the only other thing that I'll do to help this tail sit up is I'll take one wrap underneath and one wrap on top of it, and that'll hold the tail nice and upright. I'll bring my thread back up to the front of the pattern and whip finish and then trim. The reason why I tied this first part with the white, as you see, it blends in nicely with the calf hair. If you use a different color, you might see some of this going up the post. So now I'll come in with my second thread, and this is going to be a 70, and it's a dark brown. 70 because it lays relatively flat, and the dark brown because it's going to blend well with the next material that I'm going to tie in, which is a stripped Peacock herl. And the importance of that is the Peacock herl, if you don't have them exactly side by side, that thread color will help disguise any mistakes that you might have made or gaps that you might have in. So a little bit of a cheat there. Instead of having that white exposed, it'll show as the color underneath that dark brown. So now I can wrap this up. I tied it in butt first because those are the wider segments, and it'll cover a little faster. And I'll wrap a couple of turns, probably more than I need, but it'll help secure it. I can tie that off, and I'll trim it. And at this point, I want to reinforce that stripped herl, so I'll take some head cement and coat it, and it'll make it a little bit more durable. The other thing that I think it's almost like adding stain to a piece of wood. I think it brings out some more of that color dimension. So now I can tie in a regular Peacock herl for the next batch. I'll take off one or two pieces. I'll trim the stem so I've got a nice even place to tie in, and I'll be a little mindful of that head cement there. I'll wrap it back and leave it behind the eye, or behind the wings rather. Now I can bring this herl up through, and when I get to my thread, I'll tie it off. And then trim. And then the final piece is the hackle, and I'm going to use a furnace hackle and to help it go a little quicker, I'm going to take 2 pieces of furnace hackle, and I'll strip their ends, and I'll trim the tips even, And then what I like to do with this is place them between the upright wings. And I do that so that if I tie them in on one side or another, I don't want it to favor a side or push the wings out of line. So I'll tie them in between, and hopefully that doesn't affect how those wings sit. And I'll bring my thread, and I'll leave some room behind the eye to finish off the head. So now I can wrap these in together. Remember that you're doubled up, so only maybe 2 wraps behind, maybe 2 wraps in front, and then you're ready to tie off. I'll take 3 wraps to hold it, and then carefully trim. Build out a head, and whip finish. And trim that one that got caught, and the other, and maybe a drop of head cement. To hold everything together. And that is an H&L variant.